I stared at Dallas across our kitchen island, certain I'd misheard him. The morning sunlight streaming through our bay windows felt suddenly cold, and my coffee mug trembled in my hands. "What do you mean you use the house as collateral?" "Look, Marlowe, it's not as bad as it sounds," Dallas said, casually buttering his toast like he hadn't just demolished our entire life. "I had a system. The odds were in my favor. I just needed a little more time. My name is Marlowe Kent, and this is how I discovered my husband of 8 years had gambled away our home." "A system?" My voice cracked. "You had a system for betting away everything we've worked for?" Dallas's shoulders tensed, but his voice remained irritatingly calm. "The casino manager assured me." "The casino manager?" I slammed my mug down, coffee sloshing onto the marble countertop. "Since when do you take financial advice from people whose job it is to take your money?" "You're overreacting," he said, checking his phone. "I can fix this, I just need to make a few calls." I grabbed his phone, my hands shaking. "How much?" "Marlowe." "How much?" He sighed, running his fingers through his hair, a gesture that used to make my heart flutter but now made me want to scream. 450,000. The room spun. That was more than our mortgage, more than we had in savings, more than... A sharp knock at the front door made us both jump. Dallas's face went pale. "Who is that?" I asked, though I already knew. The way Dallas wouldn't meet my eyes told me everything. Just stay here," he muttered, heading for the door. I followed him anyway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. A tall man in an expensive suit stood on our porch, his presence somehow making our front entrance feel smaller. "Mr. Kent," the man said, his voice professionally detached. "I'm Carson Flores from Metropolitan Collections. May I come in?" Dallas stepped aside, and I watched as the man who would take our home walked past the family photos I'd carefully arranged on the walls. Photos of happier times when I thought I knew who my husband was. "Mrs. Kent," Carson nodded at me. "I'm here regarding the property deed used as collateral for your husband's marker at the Grand Casino." "I never signed anything," I blurted out. Carson's eyebrows rose slightly as he pulled documents from his briefcase. "Actually, Mrs. Kent, your signature is right here." I snatched the paper, my heart stopping as I recognized my signature on a document I'd never seen before. The date beside it was from 3 months ago when I'd been signing papers for our refinancing. "You slipped this in with the refinancing documents?" I turned to Dallas, my voice barely a whisper. "You planned this?" "Baby, I can explain." "Don't baby me." I turned back to Carson. "This can't be legal. He tricked me into signing." "I'm afraid that's a matter for the courts," Carson replied, not unkindly. "For now, the document is binding. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." 72 hours? The room was definitely spinning now. "This is our home, we can't just—" "I understand this is difficult," Carson said, placing his business card on our coffee table. "But Mr. Kent agreed to these terms when he took the marker." I watched Dallas sink into our couch, the one we'd picked out together on our 5th anniversary, his head in his hands, but I felt no sympathy, only rage. "Get out," I said quietly. Dallas looked up. "Marlowe." "Get out." My voice was stronger now. "Pack a bag and get out of my house." "Our house," he corrected weakly. "And technically, in 3 days, it won't be either of ours." I grabbed my phone, my fingers already finding Gianna's number. "You lost the right to call it our anything the moment you forged my signature. Now get out before I call the police and report you for fraud." "You wouldn't try me." Something in my voice must have convinced him because he stood up slowly, looking between me and Carson. "I'll get some things," he mumbled, heading upstairs. Carson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Kent, I'll need you to initial these." "Get out too," I said, my phone already ringing. "You can come back in 72 hours, but right now I need you to leave." After they both left, I sank to the floor, my back against the front door. Gianna's voice came through the phone, cheerful and unaware. "Hey girl, what's up?" "Gianna," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need your help. Dallas just confessed to gambling away our house, and I have 72 hours to figure out how to save it." There was a pause, then Gianna's voice came back, steel in her tone. I'm on my way. Don't move. And Marlo, we're going to fix this. For the first time since Dallas's confession, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not because I believed we could save the house, but because I knew in that moment that I wasn't alone. Gianna arrived 20 minutes later with Eleanor in tow, both of them carrying paper bags from my favorite bakery and determined expressions on their faces. I hadn't moved from my spot on the floor. First things first, Gianna said, pulling me up. We're going to eat these croissants, drink some coffee, and then we're going to destroy your husband. Eleanor was already in my kitchen pulling out mugs. Where is the bastard anyway? Gone. I kicked him out. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. He took some clothes and left. Good, Gianna nodded, spreading papers across my kitchen island, the same spot where Dallas had dropped his bomb just hours ago. Now tell us everything. Between bites of chocolate croissant and sips of the strongest coffee Eleanor had ever made, I recounted the morning's events. When I got to the part about the forged signature, Eleanor's husband Zane called. Put him on speaker, Eleanor said, answering her phone. Zane's a real estate attorney. He needs to hear this. I repeated the story, my voice stronger this time. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end. Zane, I prompted. Please tell me there's something we can do. Actually, his voice crackled through the speaker, there might be. The refinancing documents, do you have copies? I nodded, then remembered he couldn't see me. Yes, in my home office. Get them, now. I ran upstairs, my heart pounding. When I returned with the thick folder, Gianna was already taking photos of the gambling marker documents Carson had left behind. Okay, Zane said after I described the refinancing paperwork. Here's the thing. If Dallas slipped in that gambling document during your refinancing, there's a good chance it wasn't properly notarized. The refinancing would have had a notary present, but the gambling document would have been notarized separately, Eleanor finished, understanding lighting up her face. Marlo, do you remember signing anything in front of a notary that wasn't related to the refinancing? No, I said, my hands shaking as I flipped through the papers. Just the mortgage stuff. Look at the notary stamps, Zane instructed. Compare the dates and times. Gianna leaned over my shoulder as I laid out the documents side by side. Holy shit, she whispered. The refinancing documents were all stamped by the notary at 2:15 p.m. on March 15th. The gambling marker document with my forged signature was supposedly notarized at 2:20 p.m. by the same notary. That's impossible, Eleanor said, pointing at the stamps. No notary would stamp documents 5 minutes apart without you physically being there. They have to witness the signature. Exactly, Zane said triumphantly. Marlo, you need a lawyer, a good one. This is fraud, plain and simple. I know someone, Gianna said, already pulling out her phone. Nicole Blake. She handled my sister's divorce last year, and she's ruthless. She specializes in cases involving financial fraud. My hands were still shaking, but now with anger rather than fear. Will this be enough to stop them from taking the house? It should at least buy you time, Zane replied. They can't evict you while there's pending litigation about the validity of the document. Eleanor grabbed my hand. You hear that? You're not losing this house in 72 hours. Nicole can see you in an hour, Gianna announced, ending her call. I'm driving. I'll email you everything I know about notary fraud cases, Zane added. Eleanor, make sure Marlo brings all the documentation. As my friends moved into action around me, gathering papers and making calls, I felt something shift inside me. The devastation of the morning was morphing into something else, something harder and more determined. There's one more thing, I said, making them all pause. I want to press charges against Dallas. Gianna's face broke into a fierce grin. Now that's the Marlo I know. He's going to try to come back, Eleanor warned. Men like that always do, once they realize they've lost control. Let him try, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. I'm changing the locks today. I'll call my locksmith, Gianna said, already dialing. He can be here in 30 minutes. And I'm staying here tonight, Eleanor added. No arguments. I looked at my friends, really looked at them. Gianna, who'd survived her own husband's betrayal 3 years ago and come out stronger. Eleanor, who'd supported her through it all while building her own happy marriage with Zane. They weren't just here to help, they were here to fight. Okay, I said, gathering the documents into my bag. Let's go see Nicole. As we headed for Gianna's car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I expected to see the same broken woman who'd collapsed on the floor this morning. Instead, I saw someone different, someone stronger, someone angry, someone ready to fight back. Dallas had no idea what was coming. Nicole's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone Gianna described as ruthless. All clean lines and sharp edges, with degrees and certifications covering one wall and a view of downtown from the other. The lawyer herself matched her surroundings, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit with not a hair out of place. So, Nicole said, spreading our documents across her glass desk, your husband forged your signature to use your house as gambling collateral. She wasn't asking a question. Yes, I replied, gripping my armrest. Can you help? Nicole's perfectly manicured nail tapped the notary stamps. This is amateur hour fraud, the kind of mistake people make when they think they're smarter than the system. She looked up at me. Did your husband always think he was the smartest person in the room? I let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea. Actually, I do. Nicole pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents. I did some research before you arrived. Your husband has quite a history at the Grand Casino. Multiple markers, all paid off just in time, until now. He's been dancing on this edge for years. My stomach lurched. Years? The good news is this works in our favor. Nicole turned her tablet around, showing me a spreadsheet of dates and amounts. The casino knew his pattern. They knew he was a risk, yet they still accepted your house as collateral with obviously fraudulent documentation. They're liable. Gianna, who'd insisted on staying for the meeting, leaned forward. So what's our next move? First, we file an emergency injunction to stop the eviction. Nicole was already typing on her computer. Then we countersue both Dallas and the casino for fraud. Countersue? I asked. They threw the first punch when they sent Carson to your house, Nicole explained, not looking up from her screen. We're just hitting back harder. A notification pinged on her computer. Perfect timing. Judge Martinez is available for an emergency hearing in 2 hours. She hates gambling fraud cases. This will work in our favor. 2 hours? My voice cracked. I'm not prepared for... Yes, you are, Nicole cut me off, standing up. You're wearing a professional outfit, you have all the documentation, and you have me. That's all you need. She wasn't wrong about my outfit. Gianna had insisted I change into a blazer and pencil skirt before coming to the office. Looking powerful helps you feel powerful, she'd said. What about Dallas? I asked. Should we notify him? Let him sweat, Nicole said, gathering papers into her briefcase. He'll find out soon enough when the casino's lawyers contact him. 2 hours later, I sat in Judge Martinez's chambers, trying not to fidget as Nicole presented our case. The judge, a stern-faced woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, examined the notary stamps with growing displeasure. This is sloppy, she muttered, reaching for another document. Embarrassingly sloppy. The casino's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who'd clearly been called in last minute, cleared his throat. Your Honor, while we acknowledge there might be some irregularities in the documentation... Irregularities? Judge Martinez peered at him over her glasses. Counselor, this is textbook fraud. Your client accepted clearly falsified documents for a 6-figure transaction. That's not an irregularity. That's negligence at best, complicity at worst. I watched as the casino's lawyer seemed to shrink in his chair. Furthermore, the judge continued, attempting to evict Mrs. Kent based on these fraudulent documents shows a disturbing lack of due diligence on your client's part. Nicole sat beside me, radiating calm confidence as Judge Martinez picked up her pen. I'm granting the emergency injunction. The eviction notice is suspended pending full investigation of these documents. She fixed the casino's lawyer with a stern look. I strongly suggest your clients consider their position carefully before we reconvene. This could get very expensive for them very quickly. As we left the courthouse, Nicole was already on her phone. I'm having the injunction served to Carson immediately. He can't come within 100 feet of your property until this is resolved. What about Dallas? I asked. Oh, he'll be served too. Nicole's smile was predatory. At every possible address we can find for him. Work, gym, his favorite bars, everywhere. Gianna squeezed my arm. How does it feel? I took a deep breath of the afternoon air. Like I can finally breathe again. Good, Nicole said, ending her call. Because we're just getting started. The casino will probably try to settle. They can't afford this kind of publicity, but first, they'll try to pressure Dallas into fixing this mess. He can't fix this, I said firmly. There's no going back. No, Nicole agreed, checking another incoming message. There isn't. And speaking of no going back, the locksmith just confirmed he's finished changing all your locks. Would you like me to have the new keys sent to Dallas's lawyer, or should we make him beg for them? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt myself smile. Let him beg. The first text from Dallas came at 3 a.m., 3 days after the emergency injunction. My phone buzzed against my nightstand, lighting up the darkness. You're ruining everything, it read. The casino's lawyers are threatening to come after me personally. I switched my phone to silent and went back to sleep. By morning, there were 12 more messages, each more desperate than the last. I forwarded them all to Nicole without reading them and headed downstairs, where Eleanor was already making coffee. She'd insisted on staying with me until things settled down. Your ex is camping out in his car down the street, she said, sliding a mug across the counter. Want me to call the police? I shook my head. Nicole says we should document everything, let him dig his own grave. My phone rang. Nicole's office. The casino's lawyers reached out, she said without preamble. They want to meet. Today. That was fast. They've probably run a cost analysis on fighting this in court. Turn on your TV, check any business news channel. I grabbed the remote and Eleanor moved closer as I flipped to the news. There it was, scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Grand Casino faces fraud investigation. Stock drops 12% in early trading. Holy shit, Eleanor whispered. Exactly, Nicole said through the phone. They're bleeding money every hour this stays in the news. I've arranged a meeting for 2 p.m. Wear something intimidating. The casino's conference room felt colder than it needed to be, probably to match the icy stares from their legal team. Dallas sat on their side of the table looking like he hadn't slept in days. Good. Mrs. Kent, their lead lawyer began, we're prepared to offer... Actually, Nicole cut in smoothly, before we discuss numbers, my client has some non-negotiable terms. I sat up straighter, remembering Nicole's coaching from earlier. Let them see your strength, not your anger. First, Nicole continued, the Grand Casino will publicly acknowledge their failure to properly verify documentation in this case. Second, they will implement new verification procedures to prevent similar fraud. Third, they will forgive all of Mr. Kent's gambling debts. Dallas's head snapped up. The casino's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. And why? Their lead lawyer asked. Would we agree to forgive Mr. Kent's debts? Because, I said, finding my voice, if you don't, I'll testify about how your casino staff encouraged his gambling, despite knowing his addiction, about how they offered him private rooms, special markers, unlimited credit, all while watching him spiral. The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. You can't prove any of that, one of their lawyers said. I pulled out my phone, playing a video Dallas had sent me months ago, him bragging about his VIP treatment, the casino manager clearly visible in the background pouring champagne. I have dozens of these, I said, even though I didn't. Dallas loved documenting his success. Dallas looked like he might be sick. The casino's legal team huddled together, whispering urgently. One more thing, Nicole added, her voice carrying across their whispers. My client wants the house deed cleared of all gambling-related claims. Immediately. Their lead lawyer straightened his tie. We'll need time to consider. You have until 5 p.m., Nicole interrupted. After that, I have 3 major news networks very interested in interviewing my client about predatory gambling practices. We left them scrambling, Dallas staring at the table like it might swallow him whole. In the elevator, Nicole checked her watch. They'll cave by 4:30. They can't risk more bad press. What about Dallas? I asked. Won't this just enable him to keep gambling? No, Nicole smiled, because part of the agreement they'll sign includes banning him from all their properties, standard procedure for fraud cases. Back home, Eleanor had gathered Gianna and Zane for support. We sat around my kitchen island, my island, waiting for Nicole's call. At 4:15, my phone rang. They agreed to everything, Nicole said. I'm sending over the paperwork now. The house is yours, free and clear. Dallas's debts are forgiven, and he's banned from the casino. And the public statement? I asked. Tomorrow morning. They're calling it a voluntary review of verification procedures. Corporate speak for we messed up. After I hung up, Gianna pulled out a bottle of champagne she'd been hiding. I knew we'd need this. As we celebrated, a knock at the door made us all freeze. Through the window, I could see Dallas standing there, looking lost. Want me to get rid of him? Zane offered. I shook my head, grabbing an envelope from my desk drawer, the one containing divorce papers I'd had Nicole prepare days ago. No, I said, walking to the door. I've got this. The champagne could wait. First, I had some papers for Dallas to sign. Dallas looked smaller somehow, standing on my porch with his shoulders hunched. The confident swagger that had once attracted me was gone, replaced by something desperate and pathetic. Marlo, he started, I can explain. Save it. I held up the envelope. These are divorce papers. Sign them. He stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Can we talk about this? Inside? No. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. Through the window, I could see my friends watching, ready to intervene if needed. We're doing this here. The casino banned me, he said, running his hands through his unwashed hair. I can't even get my stuff from the hotel. My cards are all declined. That sounds like a you problem. Baby, please. Don't. My voice was sharp enough to make him flinch. You forged my signature. You gambled away our home. You betrayed every ounce of trust I had in you. There's nothing left to say. I did it for us, his voice cracked. I was trying to make things better, give us the life you deserved. By lying to me, I thrust the envelope against his chest. By risking everything we built together without even talking to me. I was going to tell you when I won big. A laugh escaped me, harsh and bitter. When you won big? That's what every gambling addict says, Dallas. Just one more hand. The next bet will be different. I have a system. His face darkened. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. I loved you. I trusted you. I would have helped you if you'd just been honest. Instead, you chose to lie, to steal, to betray me in the worst possible way. Behind me, I heard the door open slightly. Zane's voice carried quietly. Everything okay out here? We're fine, I called back, not taking my eyes off Dallas. He was just about to sign these papers. Dallas glanced at the door, then back at me. You've got quite the support system now. I always did. I just didn't need them until you showed me exactly who you are. He took the envelope, hands shaking slightly. I don't have anywhere to go. The casino forgave your debts. You're getting a clean slate, which is more than you deserve. What you do with it is not my problem anymore. I pulled a pen from my pocket and held it out. Dallas stared at it for a long moment before taking it. There's a notary inside, I said. Sign them now and this can all be over. Over? He laughed weakly. Just like that? 8 years of marriage, just over. It was over the moment you slipped that forged document into the refinancing papers. You just didn't tell me. The pen shook in his hand as he signed, each signature looking more defeated than the last. When he finished, I called for the notary, a different one from the refinancing, of course. She came out, stamped the documents, and disappeared back inside without a word. So that's it? Dallas asked, handing back the pen. That's it? I gathered the papers. Your lawyer will get copies tomorrow. Don't come back here, Dallas. Don't call. Don't text. It's done. Marlo. Goodbye, Dallas. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a moment, looking lost before finally turning and walking away. "You okay?" Gianna asked, appearing at my side with a fresh glass of champagne. "Actually, yes." I took the glass, surprised to find I was telling the truth. "I really am." Eleanor raised her glass. "To new beginnings." "And to karma," Gianna added with a grin. "To both," I agreed, clinking my glass against theirs. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. "Casino's PR statement just went live. Turn on the news." We crowded around the TV, watching as the Grand Casino's CEO made a carefully worded statement about reviewing internal procedures and strengthening verification protocols. The stock ticker at the bottom showed their shares falling another 8%. "They're going to lose millions over this," Zane commented, whistling low. "Good," I said, taking another sip of champagne. "Maybe it'll make them think twice before enabling the next gambling addict who walks through their doors." "Speaking of thinking twice," Eleanor said, "what are you going to do with the house now? Stay or sell?" I looked around at the space that had almost been taken from me, the photos I'd hung, the memories I'd made, the life I'd built. But now, instead of seeing what I'd almost lost, I saw possibility. "I'm staying," I said firmly. "But first, I'm redecorating. Everything Dallas picked out is going to charity." Gianna grinned, already pulling up interior design websites on her phone. "Now that sounds like a project I can get behind." "Tomorrow," I said, refilling our glasses. "Tonight, we celebrate." And we did, letting the champagne flow as Dallas's shadow finally began to fade from my home. 3 weeks after the divorce papers were signed, I was knee-deep in paint samples and furniture catalogues when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Carson, the debt collector, standing on my porch with an uncomfortable expression. "Mrs. Kent," he said when I opened the door, "I owe you an apology." I leaned against the doorframe, paint swatches still in my hand. "For trying to evict me from my own home? For not verifying the documentation more thoroughly?" He shifted his weight. "I've been fired from Metropolitan Collections." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "But you were just doing your job. That's actually why I'm here." He pulled out a business card. "I'm starting my own consulting firm, helping people identify and prevent fraud. Would you consider sharing your story at some of my seminars? Your experience could help others avoid similar situations." Before I could respond, a familiar car pulled into my driveway. Dallas stepped out looking better than he had on the porch 3 weeks ago, cleaned up, wearing a new suit. "Marlo," he called out, striding toward the door. "We need to talk." Carson turned, positioning himself between Dallas and the door. "Sir, I believe you should leave." "This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected, pulling out my phone. "And you're not supposed to be here." "I got a job," Dallas said quickly. "A real one, at an investment firm downtown. I'm getting help for the gambling. I'm fixing things." "Good for you," I replied, already dialing Nicole's number. "But that has nothing to do with me." "The house is still in both our names," he said. "I checked. The divorce isn't final yet." Carson stepped forward. "Sir, as someone familiar with property law, I can assure you that the court order specifically—" "Stay out of this," Dallas snapped. "This is your fault too. If you'd just given us more time." "The only person at fault here is you," I cut in, phone to my ear. "Nicole, Dallas is at my house." "Yes, right now. Perfect. Thank you." Dallas's face fell. "You called your lawyer?" "And the police," I added. "They should be here in about 3 minutes. Would you like to leave before they arrive?" "You can't just erase 8 years," he said, his voice rising. "I made a mistake, but I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to be better." "I'm glad you're getting help," I said. And I was. "But your recovery isn't my responsibility, neither are you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "Please," Dallas tried one last time. "Just give me another chance." "Like the chances you gave our marriage before gambling it away?" I shook my head. "Go home, Dallas, whatever that means for you now." The police car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. I recognized one of them, Officer Sarah, who'd taken my statement about the fraud. "Everything okay here, Mrs. Kent?" she asked. approaching the porch. Mr. Kent was just leaving, Carson answered for me, his tone professional but firm. Dallas looked between the officers, Carson and me, finally accepting defeat. His shoulders slumped as he walked back to his car. "Would you like to press charges?" Officer Sarah asked. "This could be considered harassment." I watched Dallas's car disappear around the corner. Not this time, but I wanted on record that he showed up. After the police left, Carson handed me his card again. "Think about what I said. Your story could help a lot of people." "I'll consider it," I said, tucking the card into my pocket. "And Carson? Thanks for staying." He nodded. Sometimes the worst situations bring out the best allies. Inside, I looked at the paint swatches in my hand, warm, bright colours to replace Dallas's preferred dark tones. My phone buzzed with a text from Gianna. "Heard what happened. Coming over with wine and pizza. Eleanor's bringing paint rollers." Another text came through, this one from Nicole. "Filing a restraining order first thing tomorrow. No more surprise visits." I texted back quick thanks to both, then walked through my house. My house with its half-painted walls and boxes of Dallas's things headed for donation. Each room held memories, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were just stories now, lessons learned, chapters closed. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Gianna, Eleanor, and, surprisingly, Nicole, all carrying supplies for an impromptu painting party. "We figured you shouldn't be alone tonight," Eleanor said, setting down paint rollers. "Plus," Gianna added, holding up 2 bottles of wine, "these walls aren't going to paint themselves." Nicole pulled out some papers. "And while we work, you can sign this restraining order." I looked at these women, my friends, my defenders, my support system, and felt something settle in my chest. Dallas might have taken my trust, but he'd given me something unexpected in return. The knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, and I wasn't alone. "Let's paint," I said, reaching for a roller. "I'm thinking yellow for the living room." New day, new start. 6 months after Dallas's surprise visit, I stood in my freshly renovated kitchen, preparing for a dinner party. The yellow walls glowed in the evening light, and new family photos, ones without Dallas, lined the hallway. The doorbell rang just as I was pulling lasagna from the oven. Gianna walked in without waiting for an answer, carrying a bottle of wine and a thick envelope. "You're not going to believe what came in the mail today," she said, dropping the envelope on my new kitchen island. I recognized the law firm's letterhead immediately. "The final divorce papers?" "Better." She grinned. "Open it." Inside was a check, a large one, along with a letter from the Grand Casino's legal team. "Holy shit," I whispered, staring at the numbers. "Is this real?" "Very." Nicole walked in through the still-open door, looking pleased with herself. "The casino's board decided to settle the civil suit we filed. That's your compensation for emotional damages, plus a little extra to keep quiet about the specifics." Eleanor and Zane arrived next, carrying dessert. "Did she open it?" Eleanor asked excitedly. "You all knew about this?" "Nicole told us this morning," Zane admitted. "We wanted to be here when you found out." I sat down hard on one of my new bar stools. This would pay off the entire mortgage. "And then some," Nicole added, accepting a glass of wine from Gianna. "You could sell this place? Buy something new without any memories attached." "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with how quickly the answer came. "This is my home. I fought for it. I'm staying." The doorbell rang again. This time it was Carson, carrying a folder of his own. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Had to finish the presentation slides for next week's seminar." He looked at the check still in my hand. "Ah, you got the settlement. Perfect timing." I'd agreed to speak at Carson's fraud prevention seminars. It turned out telling my story was therapeutic, and the extra income didn't hurt either. "Speaking of timing," Nicole said, pulling out her phone, "you might want to see this." She pulled up a news article. "Investment firm terminates employee over undisclosed gambling history." There was Dallas's picture looking shell-shocked outside his new office building. "He lied on his application," Nicole explained. "Didn't disclose the casino incident. Someone tipped off his employers." "Did you?" I started to ask. "Not me," she said with a small smile. "Karma doesn't need my help. The evening progressed, filled with good food, better wine, and the kind of laughter that only comes from being surrounded by true friends. As we sat around my dining room table, a beautiful handcrafted piece I'd chosen myself, Carson raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to Marlowe, who turned a nightmare into an inspiration for others." "To Marlowe," they echoed. "Actually," I said, pulling out my own folder, "I have an announcement too. I've been working with a financial advisor. I'm starting a foundation." "A foundation?" Eleanor leaned forward. "For gambling addiction awareness and fraud prevention, using part of the settlement money." I spread out the paperwork. "We'll work with families affected by gambling addiction, provide legal support, offer counselling." "That's amazing," Gianna whispered, looking through the plans. "I want you all involved," I continued. "Nicole, we'll need legal expertise. Carson, your fraud prevention experience is crucial. Gianna, Eleanor, your support group connections would be invaluable. Zane, we'll need help with the real estate aspects when we're helping families save their homes." They were all quiet for a moment, taking it in. "You're really doing this?" Nicole asked. "Using what happened to help others?" "Why not?" I shrugged. "Dallas took enough from me. I'm done letting that define my story. It's time to write a new one." "Count me in," Carson said immediately. "This fits perfectly with what I'm already doing." One by one, they all agreed. As they discussed possibilities and plans, I looked around my dining room. 6 months ago, I'd thought I was losing everything. Instead, I'd gained something priceless: purpose. The doorbell rang one final time. It was Sarah, the police officer, off duty and carrying a bottle of wine. "Hope I'm not too late," she said. "Got held up at work." "Perfect timing," I said, ushering her in. "We're just starting to plan a revolution." As we brought Sarah up to speed, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd collapsed on her floor all those months ago. She was stronger, wiser, and finally, completely free. Dallas had tried to take my home, but he'd accidentally given me something better: a mission. And surrounded by these people, my chosen family, I knew we were going to change lives, starting with mine. The morning sun streamed through my office windows as I reviewed applications for the Foundation's latest housing assistance program. A knock on my door made me look up to find Gianna standing there, practically vibrating with excitement. "Turn on the news," she said, grabbing the remote. "Right now." The Grand Casino's CEO appeared on screen, looking uncomfortable as camera flashes lit up his face. The headline scrolling beneath him read, "Major casino chain announces new addiction prevention measures." "Following recent events and community feedback," he was saying, "we're implementing comprehensive changes to our responsible gaming policies. This includes stricter verification procedures, enhanced addiction screening, and mandatory cooling-off periods for high-risk players." "They're using our guidelines," I whispered, "the exact ones we proposed." "Keep watching," Gianna said, perching on my desk. The camera panned to show Nicole standing at the podium, looking fierce in her signature blazer. "As legal counsel for the Kent Foundation, we're pleased to see the Grand Casino taking these crucial steps. However, we'll be monitoring their implementation closely to ensure these aren't just empty promises." My phone buzzed. Eleanor sending a group text. "They caved. Celebration dinner tonight." Before I could respond, Carson appeared in my doorway. "Have you seen—" "We're watching it now," Gianna interrupted, pointing at the screen. "This is just the first casino," Carson said, grinning. 3 more have reached out to me about implementing our prevention program." The news segment ended with a shot of our foundation's logo and a brief overview of our work. As they cut back to regular programming, my office phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in months. "Dallas," I said, putting it on speaker. "I saw you on the news." His voice crackled through. "The Foundation. It's incredible." "What do you want, Dallas?" He sighed. "To apologize. For real this time. I'm 6 months clean now, working with a gambling addiction counselor. She thinks maybe I could help." "With the Foundation?" Gianna and Carson exchanged looks as I considered his words. "Send your counselor's contact information to Nicole," I said finally. "If she vouches for your recovery, we might have a place for you in our peer support program, as a volunteer, nothing more." "Thank you," he said quietly. And Marlowe? I'm sorry for everything. I know, I replied, and was surprised to feel no pain, no anger, just acceptance. Good luck with your recovery, Dallas. After hanging up, Gianna squeezed my shoulder. You okay? Actually, yes. I stood up, gathering my papers. We have that speaking engagement at the community centre in an hour. We should get going. The community centre was packed. Families affected by gambling addiction, social workers, counsellors, even a few familiar faces from the casino industry. As I took the podium, I saw Sarah and Eleanor slipping in at the back, giving me thumbs up. 6 months ago, I began, I thought losing my home was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. The worst thing would have been staying silent about it. The room was completely quiet now. Every week someone comes to our foundation with a story like mine. Homes lost, families torn apart, lives destroyed by addiction and fraud. But here's what I've learned. Rock bottom can become a foundation if you build on it right. I gestured to my team, Gianna managing our support programs, Carson teaching fraud prevention, Nicole handling legal advocacy, Eleanor and Zane working with housing assistance. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. Today's announcement from the Grand Casino proves that change is possible, recovery is possible, justice is possible. After the presentation, a young woman approached me, clutching papers that looked painfully familiar. My husband, she started, tears in her eyes. He forged my signature on... Come with me, I said gently, leading her to Nicole's office. We can help. That evening, as we gathered for our celebration dinner, this time at Gianna's house, I looked around at these people who'd become so much more than friends. Eleanor and Zane discussing expansion plans for our housing program, Nicole reviewing new casino regulations with Carson, Sarah sharing stories from her fraud task force. Speech, Gianna called out, raising her glass. I stood feeling the weight of my house keys in my pocket, keys to a home that was truly, finally mine. To rock bottom, I said, raising my glass, and to the family we build on the way back up. To family, they echoed. Outside, the sun was setting on another day of changing lives, including my own. Dallas had tried to destroy my world, but instead, he'd helped me create something bigger than myself, something that mattered. Sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding something better. I'd lost a house and found a mission, lost a husband and found a family, lost my way and found my purpose. And that, I realized as I looked at my chosen family, was the best revenge of all.
I'm Kimberly, and I was born into what you'd call an ordinary family. My parents made good money, but they weren't exactly rolling in it. I had an older brother, 5 years my senior, and let me tell you, he was the golden child. Our parents sent my brother to some fancy private school with all the bells and whistles. Meanwhile, I was shuffled off to the local public school. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't terrible, but the difference was night and day. I remember this one time when I was about 8. I'd just finished watching a music video of this amazing singer, and I was so inspired. I ran to my mom, all excited, and said, "Mom, can I take singing lessons, please?" She just looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Singing lessons? Kimberly, don't be ridiculous. That's just a silly hobby. You need to focus on getting a real job when you grow up. My dad chimed in, "Your brother's the smart one in the family. You'll need to work with your hands, sweetie. No use wasting money on singing lessons." So I started looking up vocal lessons online. I'd practice in my room, trying to keep it down so my parents wouldn't complain. "Kimberly, stop that racket" became a common phrase in our house. Things might have stayed that way if it wasn't for my Aunt Sarah. She was my mom's sister, didn't have any kids of her own. She was a dentist, made good money, and for some reason she seemed to actually like hanging out with me. One day, she caught me singing in my room. I was so embarrassed, but she just smiled. "Kimberly, that was beautiful," she said. "Why didn't you tell me you could sing?" I shrugged, feeling my cheeks burn. Mom and Dad say it's silly. Aunt Sarah's face did this weird thing like she was trying not to frown. "Well, I think it's wonderful. How about we get you some proper lessons?" From that day on, everything changed. Aunt Sarah became my secret weapon. She bought me a synthesizer, and we'd spend hours learning songs together. It was like having a whole new world open up to me. When my parents found out about the lessons, they weren't thrilled. Mom even had the nerve to tell Aunt Sarah, "You should be giving that money to our son instead." But Aunt Sarah? She just smiled that calm smile of hers and said, "I think Kimberly has a real talent. I'm happy to nurture it." That was the first time anyone had ever stood up for me like that. It made me feel seen. Like maybe I wasn't just the family disappointment after all. While I was scraping by with my singing lessons, my brother was living the high life. One day he came home all excited about hockey. "Mom, Dad, I want to play hockey," he announced at dinner. I nearly choked on my peas. Last month it was tennis. The month before that, American football. And don't even get me started on his brief rugby phase. But did our parents hesitate? Nope. Dad just nodded and said, "Sure, son, we'll sign you up tomorrow." To no one's surprise, hockey didn't stick either. Neither did any of the other sports. My brother bounced from one activity to another like a pinball, never really excelling at anything. Then came the esports phase. Oh boy. "I need a gaming computer," he announced one day. "Top of the line. And I need my own room for training and competitions." I waited for my parents to finally put their foot down. But nope. They just nodded along like bobbleheads. "Of course, honey," Mom cooed. "We'll set everything up for you." And they did. They converted the guest room into his personal gaming paradise. The computer they bought him cost more than my entire wardrobe. Meanwhile, I was still sharing a room with my cousin's hand-me-down synthesizer. The worst part was the wall of fame in our living room. It was this massive display of all my brother's achievements. I use that term loosely. There were participation certificates from every sport he'd quit, academic awards from his fancy private school, even a best smile certificate from his third-grade yearbook. And me? Not a single spot on that wall. Not even a tiny corner for my straight A's or the singing competition I'd won at school. Things really came to a head when it was time for college. My brother, of course, got into some Ivy League school. Mom and Dad were over the moon. They paid for everything: tuition, a fancy apartment off campus, a new car. The works. 4 years flew by. I focused on my singing, on school, on anything to keep my mind off the unfairness of it all. Aunt Sarah was my rock through it all, always there with a word of encouragement or a new song to learn. Then, one sunny afternoon, my brother burst through the front door. He had this girl with him, all giggly and hanging off his arm. "Mom," Daddy shouted, "I've got news." They came running, of course, always at his beck and call. "This is Melissa," he said, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "We got married last week. She's moving in with us." I thought Mom was going to faint from happiness. Dad started talking about clearing out more space, maybe converting the attic. As everyone fussed over the happy couple, I slipped away to my room. I had a bad feeling about what was coming next, and boy was I right. The next month was like living in a bizarre parallel universe. Mom and Dad were all over my brother and his new wife, Melissa. They were redecorating his room, buying new furniture, even talking about building an extension to the house. Meanwhile, I was invisible. More than usual, I mean. I tried to focus on my future. I'd graduated high school with honors, not that anyone noticed, and was eyeing this small college with a decent vocal program. It wasn't fancy, but it was something. I knew Mom and Dad had been saving for my college fund. It wasn't much, but it would cover the basics. Or so I thought. One morning, about a month after the happy couple moved in, Mom and Dad called me into the living room. I should have known something was up when I saw their faces. "Kimberly," Dad started, his voice oddly formal. "We need to talk about your future. We've decided to use your college fund to cover your living expenses for the past 18 years. I blinked, sure I'd heard wrong. "What?" "You're an adult now," Dad continued, not meeting my eyes. "It's time you started paying your own way." The room started to spin. But what about college? I was counting on that money. Mom's face hardened. Your brother is married now. He needs more space and money for his family. We're giving him your room." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what? I'm just supposed to leave? Where am I supposed to go? "You'll need to find a job and your own place to live," Dad said, like he was discussing the weather. "You won't be able to afford college without money." Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I felt real, burning anger towards my parents. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home too." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom stormed out of the room. I thought that was it, that maybe they'd reconsider. But she came back with a suitcase. "Fine," she spat. "If you won't leave, I'll pack for you." She started grabbing my things, throwing them haphazardly into the suitcase. I stood there, frozen in shock. That's when I noticed my brother and Melissa standing in the doorway, watching the whole scene with smug smiles on their faces. Something in me broke. This wasn't my family. These weren't the people who were supposed to love and support me. I pushed past Mom and started packing my own things. I grabbed my clothes, my few pieces of jewelry, and most importantly, the music books and recordings Aunt Sarah had given me over the years. Nobody said a word as I packed. Nobody tried to stop me. And when I walked out the front door, dragging my suitcase behind me, nobody called me back. I found myself on Aunt Sarah's doorstep, my whole life packed into one measly suitcase. When she opened the door and saw my tear-stained face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "Oh, Kimberly, come in, sweetheart." That night, over a cup of hot cocoa, I spilled everything. Aunt Sarah listened, her face growing darker with each word. When I finished, she took my hand and squeezed it tight. "You're staying here," she said firmly, "and tomorrow we're going to figure out your future." I slept better that night than I had in years, knowing I was finally somewhere I was wanted. The next morning, Aunt Sarah dropped a bombshell on me. "I'm paying for your college," she announced over breakfast. "I've been saving for years, hoping to help you chase your dreams. This is what that money is for." We spent the next few weeks researching colleges. Aunt Sarah suggested we look into programs that combined acting and singing. "You've got a gift, Kimberly," she said. "Let's find somewhere that'll help you shine." We finally settled on a performing arts college in a city a few hours away. It had an amazing reputation and offered exactly the kind of training I'd always dreamed of. When it came time for the entrance exams, Aunt Sarah took time off work and drove me there herself. I sang my heart out, poured every ounce of emotion into my performance piece. When I finished, the panel of judges was silent for a moment. Then they broke into applause. A week later, I got the acceptance letter. I was in. I threw myself into my studies. Every class, every rehearsal, every late-night practice session, I gave it my all. I signed up for every singing competition I could find, performed in every amateur theater production that would have me. If there was a part in a musical, no matter how small, I was there, auditioning my heart out. Before I knew it, 4 years had flown by. I graduated with honors, my final showcase performance earning a standing ovation. And that's when things really took off. A rep from a big musical theater studio was in the audience that night. He approached me after the show, talking fast about potential and opportunities. Next thing I knew, I was signing a contract with one of the biggest names in the business. Suddenly, I wasn't just performing in college productions or local theaters. I was on real stages, in front of real audiences, playing lead roles in honest-to-God professional musicals. It was terrifying and exhilarating and everything I'd ever wanted. Through it all, Aunt Sarah was my rock. She came to every performance she could, always sitting in the front row, always the first one on her feet for a standing ovation. We'd go for late-night pancakes after each show, and she'd gush about every little detail of my performance. Looking at her beaming face across the table, I realized something. This woman, who had no obligation to me beyond being my mother's sister, had given me more love and support than my own parents ever had. She wasn't just my aunt anymore. She was the mom I'd always wished I had. Life was going great. I had just landed a lead role in a new musical that was generating serious buzz. One afternoon, I dropped by Aunt Sarah's place, bursting with excitement about my plans and prospects. "Aunt Sarah, you won't believe what's happening," I gushed, detailing my upcoming projects and dreams. She listened with that warm smile of hers, but as I was getting ready to leave, she dropped a bombshell. "Kimberly," she said gently, "you've grown into such a wonderful young woman. Don't you think it's time to reconcile with your parents? They're still your family, dear." I wanted to argue, but the hopeful look in her eyes stopped me. After everything she'd done for me, how could I refuse? "Okay," I said reluctantly. "I'll try." The next day, I found myself standing on my parents' doorstep, feeling like a stranger. Mom answered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Kimberly," she said, like she wasn't sure it was really me. "Hi, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. "Can I come in?" They let me stay, but it was clear I wasn't welcome. The house felt different, colder somehow, and get this, my brother was still living there. Apparently his wife had been kicked out. Mom grumbled something about her playing video games all day and refusing to help around the house or get a job. For days I endured their frosty silence and disapproving looks. I was about ready to call it quits when my brother cornered me in the kitchen. "So," he sneered, "still chasing that silly singing dream? Let me guess, you're a star in some dingy bar now." Something in me snapped. I stood up straight, looked him in the eye and said, "Actually, I'm the lead singer in several successful musicals. And I'm doing quite well for myself, thank you." You should have seen their faces. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, Mom and Dad couldn't stop asking questions. "Musicals?" "Really?" Dad pressed. "How much do you make?" I tried to leave, but Mom practically blocked the door. "You must be making good money," she insisted. "How much is your contract worth?" "That's confidential," I said, trying to edge past her. Dad's face hardened. "Now listen here, young lady. After everything we've done for you, you owe us. We're your parents. You're obligated to help us and your brother." And just like that, I was 18 again, standing in the same house being told I wasn't worth investing in. But this time, I wasn't that scared, insecure girl anymore. "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice steady. "You kicked me out, remember? Told me I wasn't worth supporting. Well, guess what? I made it without you, and I don't need you now." I headed straight to Aunt Sarah's house. She took one look at my face and opened her arms. As I hugged her, I knew this was my real family. This was home. Life has a cruel way of pulling the rug out from under you just when things seem to be going well. I was riding high on my success, performing in sold-out shows night after night, when I got the call that changed everything. Aunt Sarah had cancer. The world seemed to stop spinning. I wanted to drop everything and rush to her side, but she insisted I keep performing. "Your dreams are my dreams too," she told me over the phone, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "Don't you dare give them up for me." So I kept touring, but every free moment I had, I spent with her. We'd sit in her garden, talking about everything and nothing. I tried to memorize every detail of her face, the sound of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. But cancer is a merciless enemy. Despite the treatments, despite our hopes and prayers, Aunt Sarah's condition worsened rapidly. And then, one day, while I was in the middle of a tour, I got the call I'd been dreading. Aunt Sarah was gone. I was lucky, if you can call anything about this situation lucky, that I had a few days break between shows. I caught the first flight home, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed in a vice. As soon as the funeral was over, I had to fly back. The show must go on, as they say. But every performance felt hollow now. I sang the notes, hit the marks, but my heart wasn't in it. How could it be, when it was shattered into a million pieces? When the tour finally ended, I returned home, exhausted and grieving. That's when I got a call from a notary. Apparently Aunt Sarah had left a will, and I needed to come in to discuss it. I went to the notary's office, not really caring about what Aunt Sarah might have left me. Nothing could replace her. But when the notary started reading the will, I couldn't believe my ears. Aunt Sarah had left me everything. Her house, her savings, all of it. I broke down crying right there in the notary's office. In the following days, I moved into Aunt Sarah's house. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could move forward when my past came knocking literally. One afternoon there was a pounding on the door. I opened it to find my brother standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. "I need money," he blurted out before I could even say hello. "My wife's pregnant, and I left Mom and Dad. They've been driving me crazy with their nagging and criticizing. You've got to help me, Kimmy." I stood there, stunned. After everything that had happened, this was how he approached me. "Why don't you get a job?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice level. His face contorted in disgust. "A job? I don't need a job, I need money. You've got plenty now, don't you? That old lady left you everything." That old lady comment made my blood boil. That old lady was more family to me than you ever were, I spat. "And no, I won't give you money." His eyes narrowed. "You tricked her, didn't you? Manipulated that senile old woman into giving you everything. You're nothing but a thief. I'll take you to court, you'll see." Something in me snapped. All the grief, all the anger I'd been holding in came rushing out. "Get out," I snarled. "Get out of my house right now. You want to take me to court? Go ahead. Try explaining to a judge how the sister you abandoned deserves your handouts. Go on, get out." I slammed the door in his face, my whole body shaking. As I leaned against the closed door, I realized something. This house, this inheritance, it wasn't just a gift. It was Aunt Sarah's final act of love, her way of protecting me even after she was gone. Just when I thought the drama with my brother was over, my phone rang. It was my parents. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Kimberly, my mother's voice came through, sickly sweet. "We heard about the inheritance. Don't you think you should share some of that with your family? After all, Sarah was our relative too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice ice cold. "Now, Kimberly," my mother cooed, "we're just saying, family should help family. You've got so much now. Surely you can spare some for us." That was it. The last straw. "Family," I spat. "You want to talk about family? Where was your sense of family when you kicked me out? When you told me I wasn't worth investing in? When you chose my brother over me every single time?" There was silence on the other end. "Let me remind you of something," I continued, my voice shaking with anger. "Aunt Sarah left me everything because she believed in me when you didn't. She supported me when you abandoned me. You don't get to be family now that it's convenient for you." I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Then my father's voice, cold and hard. "You ungrateful little rubbish. After everything we've done for you." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter. Like I'd finally said everything I'd been holding in for years. But it wasn't over. Far from it. The next day I started seeing posts on social media. My parents were on a warpath, posting long, teary-eyed statuses about how their daughter had stolen their sister's inheritance. How I was a manipulative thief who couldn't even be bothered to organize a proper funeral for my aunt. It was all lies, of course. The funeral had been beautiful, exactly as Aunt Sarah would have wanted. But the truth didn't matter to them. They were out for blood. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly in my inbox, calling me horrible names. Old acquaintances left nasty comments on my photos. It felt like the whole world was turning against me. Every day brought new threats, new insults. My parents created fake profiles to harass me when I blocked their main accounts. My brother joined in, spinning wild tales about how I'd tricked a senile old woman out of her money. Then I heard through the grapevine that they were planning to sue me. My brother, my parents, they were all looking for lawyers to contest the will. For a moment, panic set in. What if they won? What if they took away this last gift from Aunt Sarah? I hired a lawyer of my own, just in case. But it turned out I didn't need to worry. My lawyer smiled when I told him about the threats of a lawsuit. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he assured me. "The will is ironclad. Your aunt was of sound mind when she made it, and she was clear about her wishes. They can try to sue, but they'll lose. And they'll lose badly." Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The law was on my side. Aunt Sarah's wishes would be respected. The harassment didn't stop overnight, but knowing I was in the right gave me strength. I started blocking accounts, reporting the worst offenders for harassment. Slowly but surely, the tide of public opinion started to turn. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind of spotlights. standing ovations, and dreams come true. I had become the successful musical actress Aunt Sarah always knew I could be. My face graced billboards, my voice filled theaters, and I even found myself on TV, still pinching myself to make sure it wasn't all a dream. Life was good. Really good. I was touring internationally, singing my heart out on stages I'd only ever imagined. Every performance felt like a tribute to Aunt Sarah, a way to honor her belief in me. Then came the night that changed everything, again. I was back in my home state for a series of shows. It was a sold-out performance, the energy in the theater electric. As I stood center stage, pouring my soul into a heart-wrenching ballad, the entire audience holding their breath, it happened. Two figures stood up abruptly, unfurling a large, hastily made poster. Even from the stage, I could make out the words, "Kimberly stole our money." My heart stopped. I'd recognize those voices anywhere. My parents. "She's a thief," my father bellowed. "She manipulated her aunt and stole our inheritance." The spell of the performance shattered. Whispers rippled through the audience, growing into a confused murmur. My co-stars froze, unsure what to do. I stood there, spotlight burning into me, feeling like that scared 18-year-old girl all over again. But only for a moment. As security rushed to remove my parents, as the stage manager frantically tried to regain control, something inside me snapped into place. This was my stage, my life, my moment. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. Unfortunately, those people are my estranged parents who have been harassing me for years. But you know what? Their actions can't touch me anymore. Because every time I step on this stage, I'm living my dream, and no one can take that away from me." The theater fell silent. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It grew and grew until it was a roar, drowning out my parents' continued shouts as they were escorted out. We finished the show, and it was one of the best performances of my life. Every note, every step felt like an act of defiance, a declaration of my right to be there. The next morning I called my lawyer. Enough was enough. It was time to end this, once and for all. We went to court, armed with years of evidence, social media posts, threatening messages, eyewitness accounts of their disruption. The case was clear-cut. The judge issued a restraining order against my parents, legally barring them from contacting me or coming near my performances. In the years that followed, my career soared to new heights. I traveled the world, performing in cities I'd only ever dreamed of visiting. Every new stage, every new audience was a thrill. My parents and brother became distant memories, faces I might pass on the street without a second glance. They were no longer a part of my story. Instead, I built a new family. Fellow performers, friends who stuck by me through thick and thin, fans whose lives I touched with my music, and at the center of it all, the memory of a woman who saw a spark in a young girl and did everything she could to help it blaze into a fire. My name is Amanda, and I was just another cog in the machine of a bustling investment company, perched high up in a sleek skyscraper. I was good at my job, damn good, if I'm being honest. As a leading specialist, I juggled multiple responsibilities and kept the place running like a well-oiled machine. My boss, Melissa, the owner of the agency, was a force to be reckoned with. Picture a stern, domineering businesswoman in her early 60s, with sharp eyes that could cut through bullshit faster than a hot knife through butter. She ran the place with an iron fist, and we all danced to her tune. Me? I was the perfect employee. Always the first one in, last one out. Weekends? What were those? My entire life revolved around spreadsheets, client meetings, and endless cups of coffee. I lived alone in a modest apartment, no husband, no kids, just me and my career ambitions. Then came that fateful day. I woke up with a pounding headache and a stuffy nose. Any sane person would have called in sick, but not me. I dragged myself to the office, determined to push through. The day dragged on, and I fell behind on my work for the first time in. Well, ever. The Stevenson report was due, and I was nowhere near finished. As the clock ticked closer to our daily briefing, panic set in. "Where's the report?" Melissa demanded as soon as she walked into the conference room. "I'm not quite finished," I stammered, my face burning with shame. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Not finished? What the hell have you been doing all day?" "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well." "I don't give a rat's ass how you're feeling," she exploded. "You had one job, one fucking job, and you couldn't even do that right." The room fell silent as she continued her tirade. "You're useless, you know that? A complete waste of space. Maybe I should replace you with someone who actually knows how to do their job." Each word was like a slap to the face. I sat there, stunned, as tears welled up in my eyes. Before I knew it, I was on my feet, running out of the room. As the doors closed behind me, I let out a choked sob. Years of pent-up emotions came flooding out as the elevator descended. I was so lost in my misery that I barely noticed when it stopped a few floors down and a man stepped in. "Hey, are you okay?" a gentle voice asked. I looked up, wiping my eyes, and saw a kind face looking back at me with concern. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice cracking. "How about we grab a coffee?" he suggested. "Looks like you could use a friend right now." I nodded, surprising myself. As we walked out of the building together, I realized this was the first spontaneous thing I'd done in years. We found a cozy little coffee shop just around the corner from the office building. As we settled into a quiet booth, the stranger introduced himself as Jack. "So, want to tell me what happened back there?" he asked, sliding a steaming cup of coffee towards me. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "It's just work stuff. My boss, she can be pretty harsh sometimes." Jack nodded sympathetically. "Sounds like a real piece of work. What do you do?" I hesitated, not wanting to give away too much information. "I'm in finance. Investment stuff, you know. It's a high-pressure job." "I can imagine," Jack said, "but that doesn't give anyone the right to treat you like crap." We talked for hours, carefully dancing around specifics about my job or boss. Jack was easy to talk to, and I found myself opening up about other aspects of my life, my childhood in a small town, my dreams of making it big in the city. Jack reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Sounds like you've worked hard to get where you are. Maybe it's time to start living for yourself, not just your job." As the sun began to set, we reluctantly said our goodbyes, but not before exchanging numbers. "I'd like to see you again," Jack said with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. From that day on, something changed. I went back to work, facing my boss's wrath with a newfound strength. Her words still stung, but they didn't cut as deep anymore. Because now I had something to look forward to outside of work. Jack and I started meeting regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, and soon we were spending every free moment together. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Then, exactly 1 year after we met, Jack took me to the same coffee shop where we'd had our first conversation, and proposed to me. Tears of happiness streamed down my face as I said yes. As we celebrated, Jack suggested, "I want you to meet my mom. She's the only family I have left." "What about your dad?" I asked, curious. Jack's face clouded over. "My parents divorced years ago, Dad. He doesn't want anything to do with me anymore. It's just me and Mom now." A few days later, we pulled up to a stunning mansion. My jaw dropped. "This is where your mom lives." Jack nodded, looking a bit embarrassed. "Yeah, she's well off." As we walked up to the front door, I felt a twinge of nervousness. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The door swung open, and I froze in shock. Standing there looking equally stunned was my boss, Melissa. "Mom," Jack said, oblivious to the tension, "this is Amanda, my fiancée." I couldn't breathe. Melissa, Jack's mother, stared at me with a mixture of surprise and disgust. She spat out, "You're marrying her." Jack looked between us, confusion turning to realization. "You two know each other." Before I could say anything, his mother cut in. "She works for me. Or should I say, under me." "Really, Jack? With your money and position, you could do so much better." I felt my face burning with humiliation. But then Jack did something that made me love him even more. He put his arm around me and said firmly, "Mom, Amanda is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm marrying her, with or without your approval." In that moment, despite the shock and fear, I felt a surge of gratitude. Whatever came next, at least I wouldn't face it alone. Despite the rocky start with Jack's mother, we went ahead with our wedding plans. It was a small, intimate ceremony just the way we wanted it. Melissa didn't show up, but we didn't let that dampen our spirits. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world together. We bought a cozy apartment, our first shared space. Those early days of marriage were blissful. But there was always a dark cloud looming over our happiness, my relationship with my mother-in-law, who was also my boss. At work, things went from bad to worse. She seemed determined to make my life a living hell. During a management meeting where I was presenting our quarterly results, she interrupted me mid-sentence. "Is this the best you can do, Amanda? My son's houseplants could put together a more compelling presentation." The room fell silent. I struggled to maintain my composure and continue, but my cheeks burned with humiliation. At the company Christmas party, she cornered me by the punch bowl. "Nice dress," she sneered, loud enough for others to hear. "Did you find it in a clearance bin?" Every day brought a new torment. She'd criticize my work in front of clients, mock my ideas in team meetings, and make snide comments about my background. But she never fired me. I knew why. Despite her personal feelings, I was damn good at my job. The agency relied on me, and she knew it. I'd come home every night, frustrated and on the verge of tears. Jack was always there, ready to listen and comfort me. But his attempts to reason with his mother only seemed to make things worse. She became convinced that I was trying to turn Jack against her, and her treatment of me at work became even more vicious. One day, after a particularly nasty encounter where she berated me in front of the entire office for a minor typo, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and broke down. When I got home that evening, Jack found me curled up on our bed, still in my work clothes, eyes red and puffy from crying. "That's it," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You can't keep doing this to yourself, Amanda. Why don't you quit? We can manage on my salary for a while until you find something else." I looked at him, fear creeping into my voice. "But what if I can't find another job? Your mother has so much influence in this industry." Jack sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "We'll figure it out together. I can't stand seeing you like this anymore. Please, Amanda, for your own sake, walk away." The next day, with Jack's support, I handed in my resignation. The look on my mother-in-law's face was a mixture of shock and fury. "You ungrateful little gold digger," she hissed. "After everything this company has done for you? You're just going to abandon ship? You'll never work in this industry again, I'll make sure of it. You'll be crawling back, begging for your job in no time." That night, as I recounted the day's events to Jack, I couldn't shake the fear that she might be right. What if I couldn't find another job? What if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life? The weeks following my resignation were a whirlwind of job applications and interviews. Despite Melissa's threats, I managed to land a position at a smaller investment firm. It wasn't as prestigious as my previous job, but it was a start. Slowly but surely, I began to adjust to my new routine. The work was challenging, my colleagues were friendly, and best of all, I didn't have to deal with my mother-in-law's constant belittling. We saw her rarely, usually just at obligatory family dinners where she'd shoot me icy glares across the table. Months passed, and I started to feel like myself again. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach began to loosen. Maybe, just maybe, things were looking up. Then came that fateful day. "Amanda, can I see you in my office?" my new boss, Mr. Johnson, called out one morning. I followed him, my mind racing through possible scenarios. A promotion? A new project? The grave look on his face as he closed the door behind us told me it was neither. "Amanda, I'm afraid I have some bad news," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "We're going to have to let you go. Your work has been exemplary. It's just, well, I can't really explain. My hands are tied here." "But that doesn't make any sense," I protested, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "You can't fire me without a reason." He sighed heavily. "I'm truly sorry, Amanda. If it were up to me, you'd stay." Here he pushed an envelope across the desk. It's not much, but it's a severance package. I hope it helps. I left the office in a daze, clutching the envelope. The spring sunshine felt mockingly cheerful as I started my walk home, too shell-shocked to even call Jack. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, I answered, my voice shaky. Well, came the all-too-familiar voice of Melissa. How does unemployment feel, Amanda? Not so high and mighty now, are we? In that moment, everything clicked into place. The unexplained firing, Mr. Johnson's discomfort, it all made sense now. You did this, I whispered, anger replacing shock. You got me fired. She laughed. A cold, cruel sound. Oh, darling, did you really think you could just walk away from me? I told you I'd ruin you, and I always keep my promises. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with rage and fear. When I got home, I broke down and told Jack everything. That's it, he said, his face flushed with anger. I'm going to talk to her. This has gone too far. But his confrontation with his mother changed nothing. If anything, it made her more determined to see me suffer. The following months were a blur of rejection and disappointment. Every promising lead would mysteriously dry up. Every interview would end with vague excuses. I started taking whatever work I could find. Waitressing on weekends, dog walking during the day, even some freelance data entry work. Anything to contribute to our household. Another few months crawled by, each day a struggle to keep my head above water. Then, out of the blue, Melissa showed up at our apartment one afternoon while Jack was at work. My heart raced as I opened the door, bracing myself for another verbal assault. But to my utter shock, she smiled warmly. Amanda, dear, she cooed, her voice dripping with sweetness. May I come in? Stunned, I stepped aside, watching her warily as she swept into our modest living room. I've been doing some thinking, she began, perching delicately on our worn sofa. All this fighting, it's not good for the family. Jack's birthday is coming up, and well, I thought it might be nice to bury the hatchet. I stood there, speechless, as she outlined her plan for a surprise party at her house. We could invite all his friends, colleagues. It would mean so much to him to see us getting along, don't you think? Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but a small part of me desperately wanted to believe her. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally come around. Against my better judgment, I agreed to help with the party. On the day of the event, I arrived early at her mansion, ready to help set up. But as soon as I walked in, I knew something was terribly wrong. The house was already full of guests, all of them turning to stare at me as I entered. Melissa stood in the center of the room, her phone held high, live streaming the entire scene. Oh, look everyone, she called out, her voice sickly sweet. The help has arrived. Before I could react, she tossed something at me. It fluttered to the ground at my feet, a maid's uniform. Put it on, dear, she said, her eyes glittering with malice. After all, serving is what you're best at, isn't it? The room fell silent, all eyes on me as my mother-in-law continued her tirade. You see, friends, Amanda here comes from the slums. Her parents were factory workers, people like her. Well, they're only fit to serve their betters, aren't they? I stood there, frozen in shock and humiliation, as titters of laughter rippled through the crowd. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the months of abuse, manipulation, and cruelty crystallized into a white-hot rage. I bent down, snatched up the uniform, and hurled it straight at her face. Go to hell, I snarled, my voice shaking with fury. Then, holding my head high, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the house, leaving behind a chorus of gasps and Melissa's indignant shrieks. I stumbled into our apartment, my whole body shaking from the ordeal I'd just endured. As I closed the door behind me, I heard Jack's voice from the bedroom. Amanda, is that you? I'm just getting ready to head to Mom's for. He stopped short as he entered the living room and saw my tear-stained face. In an instant, he was by my side, his arms around me. What happened, he asked, his voice tight with concern. I couldn't find the words to explain. Instead, I picked up his phone from the coffee table and pulled up his mother's social media page. The video was right there at the top, already accumulating views and comments. Jack's face darkened as he watched, his jaw clenching tighter with each passing second. When it ended, he threw the phone onto the couch, his hands balling into fists. "That's it," he growled. "I'm done. I'm fucking done with her." Before I could respond, he was on his own phone, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm ordering us dinner. The best this city has to offer. We're going to celebrate my birthday right here, just the two of us." As we waited for the food to arrive, Jack's phone buzzed incessantly. His mother's name flashed on the screen again and again. "Finally," he answered, putting it on speaker. "Jack," Melissa's voice screeched. "Where are you?" "Everyone's waiting. I have a cake, presents." "Save it, Mom." Jack cut her off, his voice cold. "I saw what you did to Amanda. I'm not coming, and I don't want to speak to you again." He hung up, tossing the phone aside. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of gourmet food and quiet conversation. Despite everything, I felt a warmth in my chest. Jack had chosen me. He'd stood up to his mother for me. Just as we were finishing our dessert, there was a pounding at the door. Jack opened it to reveal his mother, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" Melissa hissed, pushing past him into the apartment. Her eyes landed on me, narrowing dangerously. "This is all your fault, you little gold digger." Jack stepped between us. "That's enough, Mom. Leave. Now." She turned on him, her voice dripping with venom. "If you don't leave this nobody right now, you'll regret it. I'll cut you off completely. No inheritance, no connections. I'll ruin your career. No company in this city will hire you." I felt a chill run down my spine. After what she'd done to my career, I knew these weren't empty threats. But Jack stood firm. "I don't care," he said. "I choose Amanda. Every time." His mother's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful brat. I'll destroy you both, do you hear me? You'll be living on the streets by the time I'm done with you." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I turned to Jack, fear gripping my heart. "Jack, what if she really does?" He cut me off with a gentle kiss. "She's bluffing," he said, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "She won't actually harm her own son. We'll be fine, Amanda. I promise." As we cleaned up the remnants of our impromptu birthday dinner, I tried to share Jack's optimism, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of anxious waiting. Jack and I tried to go about our lives normally, but there was a constant undercurrent of tension. Every time the phone rang, we'd exchange worried glances. Then, one evening, Jack came home later than usual. One look at his face told me everything. "They fired me," he said, his voice hollow. "Just like that. Seems Mom has some powerful friends, including the CEO. She called in a favor." We sat on the couch, the silence heavy between us. Everything we'd feared was coming true. "What are we going to do?" I whispered. Jack ran his hands through his hair, his frustration palpable. "I don't know. Maybe we should just leave. Sell the apartment, move to another state, start over where she can't reach us." As tempting as that sounded, something nagged at me. There had to be more to this story. "Jack," I said slowly, "why did your parents divorce? You've never really talked about it." He shrugged. "I don't know the details. Dad just left one day. Mom always said he abandoned us." I took a deep breath. Maybe it's time we heard his side of the story. Jack looked skeptical, but after some persuasion he agreed to call his father. To our surprise, his dad answered immediately, his voice choked with emotion at hearing from his son after so many years. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe the next day. Jack's father, Robert, was a tall man with Jack's kind eyes and an air of resigned sadness about him. After awkward introductions, Robert began his story. "Your mother and I, we both worked for my father's company. She was in accounting. One day the IRS came knocking. They'd found evidence of tax evasion. My father was arrested. The company was in chaos." He paused, his hands shaking slightly as he sipped his coffee. "Your mother stepped up, took control. She saved the company, turned it around. But I always had my suspicions." About what? Jack asked, leaning forward. Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. I think she set my father up. She had access, motive. I confronted her about it, and, well, that's when everything fell apart. He went on to describe how Jack's mother had threatened him with compromising photos, evidence of an affair with a prominent politician's wife. She gave me a choice: leave quietly, give her everything, and never contact you. Or she'd ruin me completely. I was a coward, Jack. I'm so sorry. As Robert's story unfolded, I felt a chill run down my spine. The woman he described, calculating, ruthless, willing to destroy anyone in her path, was all too familiar. Jack sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information about his mother. I could see the hurt and betrayal in his eyes, but also a spark of something else. Determination, maybe even hope. And then something clicked in my mind. A memory from my time at the agency surfaced, something I'd seen but hadn't fully understood at the time. Wait, I said, sitting up straighter. I think I might have something. Jack and his father looked at me, confusion evident on their faces. When I worked for your mother, I explained, my words tumbling out in a rush. I saw her working on the books. She was doing double entry bookkeeping, but something seemed off about it. I didn't think much of it then, but now. Jack's eyes widened. You think you might have evidence of tax fraud? I nodded, my heart racing. It's possible. I kept copies of some files on my laptop for work. They might still be there. We hurried back to our apartment, hope fueling our steps. I booted up my old work laptop, praying the files were still there. After what felt like an eternity of searching, I found them: spreadsheets and financial records that clearly showed discrepancies. This is it, Jack's father breathed, looking over my shoulder. This could be the proof we need. Jack squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and determination. We need to take this to the authorities, he said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We submitted our evidence to the tax authorities, triggering a full-scale audit of Melissa's company. The investigation was thorough and relentless. When the results came in, they were even more damning than we'd imagined. The scale of the tax evasion was massive, spanning years and involving millions of dollars. Melissa was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and tax evasion. The trial was a media sensation, but we kept our heads down, focusing on rebuilding our lives. When the verdict came in guilty on all counts, it felt like a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. In the aftermath, the court decided to transfer ownership of the company to Jack, as the rightful heir. It was overwhelming, but Jack had a clear vision of what he wanted to do. Dad, he said, turning to his father, I want you to come back and run the company. You built this business from the ground up. It's time for you to take it back. Robert's eyes welled with tears as he embraced his son. I'd be honored, he said. As for me, Jack insisted that I return to my old position. You're the best in the business, he said with a grin. We'd be fools not to have you on board. It's been a year since then. The company is thriving under Robert's leadership, with Jack learning the ropes by his side. I'm back doing the work I love, respected and valued for my contributions. But the best part? We're a family again. Robert is a constant presence in our lives, making up for lost time with Jack and becoming the father-in-law I never knew I needed. We have weekly family dinners, filled with laughter and love, a far cry from the tense, miserable affairs of the past. As I sit here in our new home, watching Jack and his dad pore over some business plans, I can't help but marvel at how far we've come. We've weathered the storm, faced down seemingly insurmountable odds, and come out stronger on the other side.
My name's Abigail, and I've always been a go-getter. For years, I poured my heart and soul into my career at a construction company. I started as a lowly intern, but through sheer determination and countless late nights, I clawed my way up to deputy director. I was overseeing the most challenging architectural marvels in the city. Skyscrapers that kissed the clouds, bridges that spanned impossible distances, and buildings that defied gravity. Each one was a testament to what I could achieve when I set my mind to it. My colleagues used to joke that I was married to my job. They weren't far off. I lived and breathed construction. My apartment was filled with blueprints and models. My weekends were spent touring building sites. And my bank account? Well, let's just say it was very healthy. But as I approached my mid-30s, something changed. I'd look at the towering structures I'd helped create and feel a sense of pride, sure. But there was also an emptiness. A void that no amount of professional success could fill. It was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly I saw couples everywhere. Holding hands in the park, pushing strollers down the street, stealing kisses in cafes. And I wanted that. I wanted it badly. But dating at 36 isn't easy, especially when you've spent the last decade focused solely on your career. I tried the apps, went on a few awkward blind dates set up by well-meaning friends. Nothing clicked. Then, at an industry conference of all places, I met Tom. He was charming, intelligent, and shared my passion for architecture. We bonded over our mutual love of Frank Lloyd Wright and our shared frustration with city zoning laws. Our relationship moved quickly. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. I'd never been happier. One night, as we cuddled on the couch in our cozy apartment, Tom turned to me with a glint in his eye. "Abby," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, "I've been thinking, why don't we build our own house? Our dream house." I threw my arms around him, nearly knocking him off the couch. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into designing our dream house with the same passion I'd always applied to my work projects. I enlisted the help of our company's leading architect, and together we created something truly special. We pored over every detail, from the layout to the materials. I wanted everything to be perfect. This wasn't just a house, it was our future. To fund our dream, we made the decision to sell our apartment. It was a big step, but we were both so excited about the prospect of our new home that we didn't hesitate. As construction began, I found myself spending more and more time at the site. I'd stand there, watching our plans come to life, brick by brick. It was exhilarating. "You know," Tom said one day, as we stood arm in arm, watching the framework of our house take shape, "there's still one thing missing from this picture." I looked at him, puzzled. "What's that?" He placed a hand gently on my stomach. A little one to fill all these rooms. My heart skipped a beat. We'd talked about having children before, of course, but always in a vague, someday kind of way. But now, with our dream house becoming a reality, the idea suddenly felt very real and very right. The next 2 years were the happiest of my life. Our house was completed, and it was everything we dreamed of and more. Every room was filled with love and the promise of the family we were going to create. And then finally it happened. I still remember the moment I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold it. "Tom," I called out, my voice trembling with excitement. "Tom, come here." He rushed into the bathroom, concern etched on his face. "What is it? Are you okay?" I couldn't speak. I just held out the test. Tom let out a whoop of joy and swept me up in his arms, spinning me around the bathroom. We were both laughing and crying, overwhelmed with happiness. The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments, nursery planning, and daydreams about our future. We decided not to find out the baby's sex, wanting it to be a surprise. At my 5-month checkup, the doctor confirmed that everything was progressing perfectly. Our baby was healthy and growing right on schedule. Tom and I left the clinic on cloud 9, already making plans for the next 4 months. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. I remember because I glanced at the clock as I fumbled for my phone, my heart already racing with a sense of foreboding. "Mrs. Thompson," an unfamiliar voice. "I'm afraid there's been an accident." The next few hours passed in a blur. The hospital, the doctor's grim faces, the words that shattered my world. "I'm sorry, we did everything we could." Tom was gone. Just like that. A drunk driver, they said. He never stood a chance. I don't remember much of the following days. I moved through the funeral like a ghost, barely registering the sympathetic touches, the murmured condolences. Weeks passed. I couldn't bring myself to go back to work. The thought of facing those towering buildings, those grand projects that Tom and I had once marveled at together, was unbearable. My boss, Jim, came to see me at home. He sat across from me, his face etched with concern. "Abigail," he said gently, "I think it might be best if you took some time off. Permanently, if that's what you need. We're prepared to offer you a substantial severance package. You won't have to worry about money." I should have felt grateful, but I felt nothing. Just a vast, empty numbness. As the weeks turned into months, I focused all my energy on my unborn child. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my son was born. As I held him in my arms for the first time, I felt a spark of something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. I named him Thomas, after his father. As I gazed into his tiny face, I saw echoes of Tom: the same nose, the same chin. It was both heartbreaking and healing. As Thomas grew, so did my love for him. He was a bright, curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to learn more. He excelled in school, bringing home report cards that made my heart swell with pride. As much as I loved watching Thomas thrive, I knew I needed something for myself too. So when he started school, I took a job at a small local construction firm. The salary was nothing compared to what I used to make, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I could be home when Thomas got back from school, that I could attend his soccer games and help with his homework. We lived simply, but we were happy. Our house, once a symbol of the life Tom and I had dreamed of, became a home filled with laughter and love. And while the pain of losing Tom never fully went away, the joy of raising our son helped ease the ache. The years flew by, and before I knew it, Thomas was graduating high school. I stood in the audience, tears of pride in my eyes as I watched him accept his diploma. My little boy was all grown up. I got in, Mom. Thomas burst through the door one day, waving an acceptance letter. "I'm going to State University." My heart swelled with pride, even as it ached at the thought of him leaving. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud of you." The day I dropped him off at college was one of the hardest of my life. As I helped him unpack in his dorm room, I couldn't help but think of my husband, wishing he could see the amazing young man our son had become. The house felt emptier than ever without Thomas, but I threw myself back into work, taking on more responsibilities at the construction firm. My experience and skills hadn't faded, and soon I was managing major projects again. I used my increased earnings to pay for Thomas's tuition and send him a monthly allowance. It was tight sometimes, but seeing him thrive made it all worthwhile. After graduation, Thomas decided to stay in the city where he'd gone to college. He landed a good job at a tech startup, and I couldn't have been prouder. I'd visit him most weekends, and we'd explore the city together. "Mom, you've got to try this new sushi place," he'd say, or "There's an art exhibit I think you'll love." Those weekends were precious to me, a chance to reconnect with my son and see the man he was becoming. Then, about 3 years after he graduated, Thomas called me, his voice brimming with excitement. "Mom, I've met someone. Her name's Jessica, and she's amazing." I was thrilled for him, of course. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice changes. Thomas began asking for more money, talking about expensive restaurants and designer clothes. "Mom," I was thinking, "maybe you could help me buy a car," he asked during one of our calls. "Jessica's family all drive really nice cars, and..." That's when alarm bells started ringing. "Thomas," I said firmly, "I love you, and I want you to be happy. But money can't buy love. If Jessica cares about you, it won't be because of expensive gifts or flashy cars." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Thomas spoke again, his voice was cold. "You just don't understand, Mom. Things are different here." After that, our calls became less frequent, our weekend visits rarer. It hurt, but I told myself it was just a phase. A year later, Thomas showed up at my door with a beautiful young woman. "Mom, this is Jessica. We're getting married." Jessica was indeed stunning, with perfectly styled hair and designer clothes. She was polite, and to my surprise, she seemed genuinely impressed by our home. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, her eyes wide as she took in the living room. "This house is incredible. I've never seen anything like it." She moved from room to room, marveling at the details. "The layout is so thoughtful, and the way you've maximized the natural light. It's just beautiful. And so functional too." Thomas beamed, clearly pleased by her reaction. "We wanted to invite you to the wedding in person," he said, handing me an ornate invitation. "Jessica's parents are handling everything." As they left, I felt a mix of emotions. Jessica's admiration for the house seemed genuine, but I still couldn't shake a feeling of unease about the changes I'd seen in Thomas. The wedding was a lavish affair, more like a society event than a celebration of love. I felt out of place among the designer gowns and expensive jewelry, acutely aware of my own simple dress. As my bank account grew, so did an idea that had been percolating in the back of my mind. I wanted to do something special for Thomas and Jessica, to show them how much they meant to me. I started sketching plans for a house, one that would combine my years of experience with everything I knew about Thomas's tastes. But I held off on starting the project, telling myself to wait for the right moment. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long. One sunny Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Thomas and Jessica were standing on my porch, looking slightly nervous. "Mom," Thomas said, "we've been thinking. You're all alone in this big house, and well, we've decided to move back to the city. We thought maybe we could live here with you." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I helped Thomas and Jessica settle in. At first, everything seemed perfect. We had family dinners every night, and I loved hearing about their days over morning coffee. But as the weeks wore on, things began to change. It started small, Jessica rearranging the furniture without asking, or complaining about the brands of food I bought. Then one evening, as I was preparing dinner, Jessica swept into the kitchen, her nose wrinkling. "Abigail, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "don't you think it's time we upgraded our menu a bit? Perhaps some foie gras, or at least a nice vintage wine. After all, this is our home now." "Actually," I said gently, "this is still my house. I'm happy to have you both here, but—" I didn't get to finish. Jessica's face contorted with rage. "Thomas," she shrieked. "Thomas, come here. Your mother is being impossible." Thomas came running, and to my shock, he immediately took Jessica's side. "Mom, what's your problem?" he yelled. "Can't you just do this one thing for us?" From that moment on, the atmosphere in the house became unbearably tense. Thomas and Jessica barely spoke to me, whispering to each other and falling silent whenever I entered a room. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. I was about to enter the living room when I heard Jessica's voice, low and insistent. "We need to get her out, Thomas. This house is wasted on her. Think of what we could do with it." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. But Thomas's response was even worse. He actually laughed and said, "You're right, Mom's had her time. Maybe we should start looking into nursing homes. I hear the state ones aren't too bad." I couldn't contain myself any longer. I stepped into the room, shaking with anger and hurt. "Is that really what you think of me, Thomas? After everything we've been through?" Thomas looked startled, then guilty, but as he glanced at Jessica, his expression hardened. "Mom, I think it's time you left. This is our house now." I felt as if I'd been slapped. But in that moment, a lifetime of strength and determination surged through me. I drew myself up to my full height and looked my son straight in the eye. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "This is my house. The house your father and I dreamed of. The house where I raised you, and you." I paused, my heart breaking even as I said the words. "You are no longer welcome here. Both of you, get out." Thomas and Jessica stared at me in shock, clearly not expecting this response. As they gathered their things and left, I felt a mixture of pain and relief wash over me. The door closed behind them, and I sank onto the sofa, finally allowing the tears to come. The morning after I kicked Thomas and Jessica out, my phone started ringing incessantly. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to face the fallout. But as the days passed, the messages became more frequent and more aggressive. Finally, I answered one of Thomas's calls. His voice was cold and businesslike, a far cry from my loving son. "Mom, I've been doing some research," he said without preamble. "As Dad's son, I'm entitled to inherit from him. I want half the value of the house. If you don't cooperate, I'll take legal action." I hung up, my hands shaking. How had it come to this? The son I raised, threatening to sue me. Despite having the means to pay Thomas off, the thought of rewarding his behavior made me sick. The plans I'd drawn up for their new house now felt like a mockery. I shoved them into a drawer, determined not to give them another thought. Feeling lost, I reached out to Jack, an old friend of Tom's who had become a lawyer. We met at a local cafe, and I poured out the whole sordid story. "Abigail, I'm so sorry you're going through this," Jack said, "but I can assure you, legally you're in the clear. Tom's will left everything to you, no conditions." I felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by a surge of guilt. Should I be glad that my late husband had, inadvertently, protected me from our own son? Jack must have sensed my conflicted emotions. "Look, if Thomas does decide to sue, there will be some costs involved. You'll have to go through court proceedings, which can be stressful. But based on what you've told me, he doesn't have a leg to stand on." I clung to the hope that Thomas might come to his senses yet, even as his calls became less frequent. Maybe he was realizing the error of his ways. Maybe things would get better. Then came the morning that shattered that illusion. I woke up early, as usual, and went to get the newspaper. As I opened the front door, something caught my eye. There, stuck in my perfectly manicured lawn, was a giant for sale sign. As I stood there in shock, Mrs. Henderson from next door came over, concern etched on her face. "Abigail, dear, are you moving?" I had no idea. "We'll miss you terribly in the neighborhood." I opened my mouth, then closed it again, at a loss for words. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? More neighbors gathered, all full of questions I couldn't answer. Who was the realtor? When was the open house? Had I found a new place yet? Feeling overwhelmed, I retreated into the house and tried calling Thomas. It went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, each more desperate than the last. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I marched outside, grabbed the for sale sign, and yanked it out of the ground with all my strength. I carried it around to the back of the house and threw it behind the garden shed, out of sight. That evening, I was trying to relax on the sofa, my mind still reeling from the events of the day. The house felt oppressively quiet. Suddenly, the front door burst open, shattering the silence. Thomas strode in, Jessica close behind. But they weren't alone. A well-dressed couple followed them, looking around with obvious interest. "And this is the living room," Thomas was saying, his voice unnaturally bright. "Notice the vaulted ceilings and the custom fireplace." The couple nodded appreciatively. "It's stunning," the woman said. "We'd be prepared to make an offer right away." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "This house is not for sale. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." Thomas turned to the couple, an apologetic smile on his face. "I'm so sorry about this. This is just crazy old lady who sometimes wanders in. Pay her no attention." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Thomas, how dare you? I'm your mother." "See what I mean?" Thomas said smoothly. "Delusional. We'll have her removed, don't worry." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my phone. "I'm calling the police right now if you don't all leave." Seeing I was serious, the couple hurried out. Thomas and Jessica lingered, fury evident on their faces. "You'll regret this," Jessica hissed. "You'll never see your son again. Or your grandchildren." As they stormed out, I suddenly noticed Jessica's slightly rounded stomach. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She was pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother, and I might never even meet my grandchild. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Thomas and Jessica, backed by her parents' money, had hired a team of high-powered lawyers. They threw everything they had at me, trying to claim that Thomas had rights to the house, that I was mentally unfit, that I had promised to sign over the property. I was exhausted. My health began to suffer. Dark circles appeared under my eyes and I lost weight rapidly. Eventually, I had to quit my job. I simply couldn't concentrate on work with all this going on. One morning, as I was picking up the newspaper, checking, as always, to make sure no new for sale signs had appeared overnight, my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, approached me. "Abigail, dear," she said gently, "I hate to see you suffering like this. Have you considered going public with your story? There's a TV show that deals with family disputes. Maybe if you told your side? I thanked her, but put the idea out of my mind. Or at least I tried to. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was Thomas, his voice dripping with disdain. "Listen, you old fool," he snarled. "You can't hold out forever. Why don't you just give up and save us all a lot of trouble?" Something in me snapped. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer injustice of it all, it was too much. The next day, I called the number Mrs. Henderson had given me. A week later, I found myself sitting under bright lights, cameras pointed at me, telling my story to a sympathetic host and a shocked studio audience. As I spoke about the house Tom and I had built, about raising Thomas, about the betrayal and the legal battles, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like someone was truly listening to me. I had no idea what the consequences of this decision would be, but as the audience murmured in sympathy and the host promised to get to the bottom of this, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point I'd been praying for. A few days after my television appearance, I heard a knock at the door. I found myself face to face with Jessica's parents, looking uncomfortable and out of place on my porch. "May we come in?" Jessica's father asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I nodded, bracing myself for another confrontation. But as we settled in the living room, they surprised me. "We saw you on TV," Jessica's mother began, her eyes brimming with tears. "We had no idea what Jessica and Thomas were doing. We're so sorry, Abigail." They explained how they'd spoiled Jessica, always giving in to her demands for money. When they learned about her pregnancy, they'd bought the couple an apartment, thinking it would make them happy. But Jessica was furious, her father said, shaking his head. "She said she deserved a house, not some cramped apartment when we refused. She said she'd handle it herself. We had no idea this is what she meant." "I was going to build them a house," I admitted, pulling out my old sketches. "I had the money, the plans. But after everything that's happened, I can't reward their behavior." Jessica's parents nodded in understanding. "We've decided to cut them off financially," her father said firmly. "No more money for lawyers or anything else. It's time they learned to stand on their own 2 feet." True to their word, Jessica's parents withdrew their financial support. Without the money for high-powered lawyers, Thomas and Jessica's case crumbled. The judge ruled in my favor, affirming my sole ownership of the house. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I just felt tired and sad. Months passed. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had given birth to a boy, my grandson. The news brought a bittersweet ache to my heart. More time went by. Occasionally I'd get desperate calls from Thomas or Jessica, begging for money. Each time I forced myself to say no, even though it broke my heart a little more. Then 2 years after that fateful TV appearance, I opened my door to find Thomas standing there. He looked terrible, thin, unkempt, with dark circles under his eyes. "Mom," he croaked, and then he broke down crying. Through his tears, Thomas poured out his heart. How he'd been selfish and stupid. How he'd let Jessica's greed infect him. How he now understood the sacrifices I'd made raising him alone. Part of me wanted to wrap him in my arms like I did when he was little, to tell him everything would be okay. But the wounds were still too fresh. "I'm not ready to forgive you, Thomas," I said gently. "You hurt me deeply. But I'd like to meet my grandson." We worked out an arrangement. Every other Saturday, Thomas would bring little Tom Jr. to visit. I'd babysit, buy him clothes and toys, and for a few hours I could pretend we were a normal, happy family. Surprisingly, it was Jessica who began to thaw first. One day, as she picked up Tom Jr., she paused. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you do for him. I understand now how lucky Thomas was to have you as a mother." As for Thomas and me, we're still working on rebuilding our relationship. Some days are better than others. Sometimes when he smiles, I see glimpses of my little boy, and other times, the memory of his betrayal is too strong to bear. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him. The trust we once had may be gone forever. But as I watch Tom Jr. playing in the garden that his grandfather and I once dreamed of, I feel a sense of peace.